You know that classic scene, right? A kid hand deep in the cookie jar with this huge, mischievous grin on their face. And we've all wondered, what does that smile actually mean? Is it guilt or is it triumph? Well, today we're going to dive into the science behind that very smile. So let's start with the big question. Can you really spot a cheater just from their smile? It's so easy to see a grin and think, ahaha, guilt. But what if that's not it at all? What if that smile is telling us something completely different about what's going on in that little kid's head? We're about to find out what a child's face really reveals when they're stuck between doing the right thing and the wrong one. And to get some real answers, we're looking at a fantastic study from researchers at the University of Toronto and the University of British Columbia. They decided to take a much closer look at this whole thing. So instead of just guessing, they designed this really cool experiment to see if there were actual observable clues in a kid's behavior when they're tempted to cheat. And it all kicks off with something they called a child's secret smile. How'd they do it? Well, they created this clever little scenario called the impossible fruit game. They brought in about 120 kids, all between 4 and 7 years old. And this wasn't some scary test. No, it was a game. A game that just so happened to have a tricky moral choice hidden right inside. So here's the setup. First, the child learns a pretty simple fruit counting game. They get to play 4 easy practice rounds and win gold stars, always a big hit. But here's the most important part. The number 1 rule was made crystal clear. You can't peek at the answer. Then, bam, the final round is an impossibly hard question. And right at that moment, the experimenter says, "Oh, I'll be right back," and leaves the kid totally alone for 1 minute, with that secret answer just sitting there. And you can really see the challenge they set up here. I mean, look at this. For a 5-year-old trying to count all those tiny little fruits in just a minute, it's basically impossible. The whole thing was designed to be so tough that the temptation to just find an easier way would be pretty hard to resist. And right there, that's the temptation. The answer was on the screen the whole time, but it was hidden behind a simple object, like a toilet paper roll. So to see it, the child would have to physically get up, move, and peek over. It was a very clear, deliberate choice to break the rule. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and it's really important to know how they handled this. The parents gave their full, informed consent to have their child's session recorded, and they also weren't in the room during the game, which was key. It allowed the researchers to see how the kids would really act when they thought no one was watching. All right, so the stage is set. The kids are alone. The temptation is real. What happened next? Let's get into the clues their behavior gave away and what the researchers actually discovered. Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. The first huge clue they found was smiling. Just look at this chart. A whopping 82% of the kids who peeked at the answer smiled right afterward. Now compare that to the kids who didn't cheat. Only about 33% of them smiled. That's not a small difference. That is a massive clue that this smile isn't what we think it is. So why the big smile? Well, it's probably not guilt. Psychologists have a name for this feeling. Sometimes it's called duping delight. But an easier way to think of it is the sneaky thrill. You know, that little rush of excitement you get from breaking a rule and actually getting away with it? For a little kid, finding that secret answer feels like a win. But the second clue was honestly even more surprising. The researchers looked at how often kids covered their faces, putting their hands over their mouth or touching their nose. And as you can see here, the kids who would eventually cheat were already covering their faces a lot more, right from the very beginning. And here's the real twist. This wasn't a reaction to cheating. This was happening from the get-go, even during the easy practice rounds. It suggests that covering your face might just be a pre-existing trait for some kids, not necessarily a sign of guilt in that specific moment. Of course, the researchers checked for other classic tells too, like rhythmic body rocking, something we often connect with being nervous. But here, nothing. They found no significant difference at all between the two groups. And that's just as important, because it tells us that not every little fidget is some kind of clue. So let's step back. What does all of this actually mean? Because the point of this research really isn't to build a better lie detector for kids. It's about something much, much deeper than that. It's about understanding how their moral and emotional worlds are developing. So let's just quickly sum up the big takeaways here. First, for a young child, breaking a rule can genuinely feel exciting. That sneaky thrill is a very real emotion. Second, some behaviors we might think are suspicious could just be part of who a kid is. And that's why this is so important. It's not about catching kids in a lie. It's about getting a real peek into their amazing, complex, developing emotional world as they figure all this stuff out. And really, the researchers themselves put it perfectly. They said that if we truly want to understand honesty in kids, we have to look at their expressions and behaviors, not as proof of guilt, but as little windows into that very dynamic moment-to-moment process of making a moral choice. It's just a powerful reminder that behind a simple kid's smile, there's a whole complex world of development going on. So maybe the next time you see that grin, you'll see it a little bit differently. Thank you so much for watching this explainer.